Hello, I'm Christian, this is my friend Jeremy and my friend John, and we're continuing our reviews on Universal's Frankenstein series with Son of Frankenstein, which came out in 1939. This is the third film in the series, and it's a sequel to 1931's Frankenstein and 1935's The Bride of Frankenstein, both of which were based on the Mary Shelley novel of the same name. So what do you guys think of Son of Frankenstein?
I like it. I think it's a very good follow-up to, Bride, and I also, I love the acting, again, is terrific, especially from, of course, Boris Karloff, Basil Rathbone, and especially Bela Lugosi as Ygor.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of this movie?
I love it. It's a great, again, it's like, you would think after the first two were, like, big hits, the third film, like with the third film in a series, it tends to be a terrible one, but this really, it blew everyone's mind away. Wow, a third film can do well.
Yeah, I think it's very good. I don't like it as much as the first two, but it's still a very good follow-up to those first two films, despite some of the continuity issues, which we'll discuss that later on. But what were you going to say?
I love Bela Lugosi's. I think this is Bela Lugosi's best role. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's done a lot of good things, but I think this is his best role, period. I'm surprised he was not nominated for the Oscar at that time.
Oh, okay.
Seriously, he should have been nominated for the Oscar.
This is definitely, I think this role was probably good for him because he's always said that playing Dracula was sort of both a blessing and a curse, because it's the role he's most well known for, and even though he only played the character twice on film, almost every other character he's played in other films are almost like variations on Dracula in a way. So here he's playing a character who's so unlike Dracula. This was really a chance for him to sort of stretch his acting muscles, I would say. Now, the plot of Son of Frankenstein is it's about the son of Henry Frankenstein from the first two movies, Wolf Frankenstein. Now, Wolf comes to the village that his father is from with his wife and son. While they are there, the Frankensteins are greeted with hostility because of what Henry did in the first two movies. Eventually, Wolf meets a hunchback named Ygor who claims to have known his father. Now, Ygor was hung by the villagers years prior to the events of this movie for grave robbing, but he somehow lived. Eventually, Ygor introduces Wolf to the monster that his father created. The monster somehow survived after what happened to him at the end of The Bride of Frankenstein. However, the monster is very weak, and Ygor basically tempts Wolf into reviving the monster. As the movie goes on, Wolf becomes more and more obsessed with giving life to this creature, and this is really affecting his home life and also affecting his mental health. Soon it becomes apparent that Ygor wants revenge on the people who hanged him, so in the movie he manipulates the monster into killing these people, and that's the basic plotline of Son of Frankenstein. Now, in the movie, Basil Rathbone plays the character of Wolf von Frankenstein. Now, Rathbone is perhaps most famous for playing Sherlock Holmes in many of the Sherlock Holmes movies that were coming out around this time. And Boris Karloff, of course, reprises his role as the Frankenstein monster. Now, what's interesting is Karloff would return to the series in House of Frankenstein. However, he did not play the Frankenstein monster in that movie. He played a completely different character. Now, Karloff would actually go on to play Victor Frankenstein in 1958's Frankenstein 1970, but that film is unconnected to the Universal films. In the film, Bela Lugosi plays Ygor, who would really go on to become a very iconic character, and he's really the main villain of the film. The monster, if anything, is more of a secondary antagonist in this film, if you want to call the monster an antagonist. I would say the monster is definitely more of an antagonist in this film than he was in Bride of Frankenstein. Lionel Atwill plays the character of Inspector Crow, who I think is definitely one of the most compelling characters in the film and really in the whole series. Donnie Dunagan plays Wolf's annoying little shit of a son. Now, Dunagan also played the voice of Bambi. Now, what do you guys think of the acting and the characters in the movie? What characters or acting might have stood out to you?
Well, I think most of it is great. Karloff, even though he's not given as much to do in this movie as he was in the last two, he does a terrific job. Lionel Atwill, he's very, compelling, and his character is great. Basil Rathbone, I'd say he's pretty good too, although he gets a little over the top in parts of it.
I actually liked how over the top he got. It just shows how, angry and, just pissed off he is at how these villagers are, like, condemning him for something his father did, even though in a way they're kind of right, because he is trying to revive the monster.
And, of course, I want to mention Bela Lugosi as Ygor, who, well, I mean, he's incredible, and, he really, his voice, I like what he does, he lowers it a lot, and I like how he, gets all humped like that, He just really, whenever he talks, you can almost sort of imagine it's probably because the strain of, the hanging that
the broken neck
on his broken neck.
I did love the little touch where, like, he knocks on the wound on his broken neck, and it sounds like somebody's knocking on a door or something.
Yeah. And I'd just like to mention that, unfortunately, not all of the acting is top-notch. Donnie Dunagan, who plays the old Frankenstein's son, he could not act his way out of a cardboard box.
I went hunting!
I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he's not very good in this role, and acting was not his calling.
Didn't you say you wrote him a letter a few years ago?
Oh, yeah, I did. And he was very, he did send back a little autographed picture, which I did appreciate. So, I'm sure he's a great guy.
It's bad, but I give it a pass on him. He was just a little kid.
I mean, I guess you could say that.
Yeah. Now, I do want to discuss more the character of Ygor and who or what he could be. I kind of got the implication that maybe he is some kind of supernatural being because they hung him, yet somehow he still lived. Now, there are some fan theories that he could possibly be Fritz from the first movie, but, I mean, that's just a theory. But what do you think of that? Do you think Ygor could be a supernatural being in some regard?
I don't know.
I mean, I suppose anything's possible. I mean, Dracula, as we would later learn in later entries, is in this sort of shared continuity. He's supernatural, so maybe Ygor could be too.
Yeah.
I think it works very well. I mean, I don't like a lot of the continuity problems. So what the hell is with that fur vest? I do not like that. But.
I mean, the way I read it is like, yes, John's holding a toy of it, but the way I kind of read it is like between this and the events of Bride of Frankenstein, because he was kind of alive between those events. Maybe at one point the monster decided, hey, I like this fur vest. I don't know,
but this is the classic look.
How the monster learned how to speak in the previous film, and yet for some reason he doesn't speak here.
Yeah.
Now, you could assume that maybe after the lab blew up in the previous film, maybe he got amnesia. I don't fucking know, but it's like...
Yeah, I also want to say...
What happened to the bride?
Yeah, what happened to the bride?
Well, the bride died. The monster had eternal life, but the bride didn't. Let's go with that, okay?
Also, another continuity problem is, in Bride of Frankenstein, the monster was all burned from the windmill, but... in this one, his hair is grown back. He doesn't seem to have any burn marks at all.
Well, this has to be at least 40 years after all that is
over
and done.
Burns last a while.
True. You could forgive the continuity problems, because you gotta understand, at the time this movie came out, there was no VHS, no DVD. There was no way that people back then would have been able to see those two films again.
Yeah.
So probably a lot of the audience, the last time they saw the first two movies was when those movies came out.
I also want to quickly mention how Boris Karloff's daughter, Sarah, was born on his birthday and while he was filming on the set of this movie, and I've heard that he had to rush from the set in full costume and makeup to the hospital. And I can't imagine the hospital workers, the doctors and the nurses all seeing this monster just running in there. How scared they must have been. And I read that I actually know her, I've met her and written to her. I've heard, I never asked her this myself, but I've heard that her father considered her the most expensive birthday gift he's ever gotten.
I wanted to point out how this film definitely seems to take a lot of inspiration from German expressionist films, just like Frankenstein's castle in the movie is so clearly inspired by... It looks like something out of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari in a lot of ways. I also want to point out the scene where Inspector Crow is telling that story about how the monster broke into, his home when he was a child and ripped his arm out. That's a chilling freaking scene.
That is.
Even though it's another continuity problem, because when the hell did that happen?
Right.
But even so, it's a chilling freaking scene. Just that whole idea, that whole implication. Can you imagine a 5-year-old child having the arm ripped out of his socket?
I also like that scene because he tells him that, after Wolf Frankenstein kind of says, "Oh, you never even saw it. You know, how do you even know?" You know, he's kind of trying to dismiss his claims, and he just kind of puts him in his place.
Now, Jeremy, you wanted to point out sort of the meta joke in it, where they make a joke about, in the beginning, about how the monster is sometimes called Frankenstein.
Yeah, I mean, even back then, I think they were starting to become aware that people were, you know, mistaking the monster for Frankenstein. And so at the very beginning of Son of Frankenstein, when Wolf Frankenstein and his wife and his son are, you know, first coming to the village, you know, Wolf Frankenstein is going on about how he hates how the town, you know, hates him and his family name. And, you know, he's like, they're associating my family name with that horror and that creature. Why, they're even starting to refer to the creature, or call the creature. And then before he could say Frankenstein, he gets interrupted. And I just think that's such a great little in-joke. Yeah. And the fact that they did that back then was just terrific.
Now, I do want to discuss how this film definitely, like the first two films, had an influence on pop culture. For example, the character of Ygor has become so iconic that whenever, like, people think of Frankenstein having a hunchback assistant, they think of Ygor. And I think some people even mistake the character of Fritz from the first movie as being Ygor. I also want to point out how Young Frankenstein, while not just being a spoof on the first two movies, also spoofed a lot of stuff from this movie. Specifically, the character of... There's a character in Young Frankenstein who was clearly making fun of Inspector Crow from this movie. So yeah, that was our review of Son of Frankenstein. Our next movie review will be on The Ghost of Frankenstein.